Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Cooperstein, SVP of Compliance for Corporate Synergies. Thanks for joining us today for our second COVID-19 briefing, where we're going to focus on some common COVID-19 related leave and benefit scenarios that often arise so that we can address some common questions that our benefits consultants are getting from our clients, and then hopefully address some of your live questions that you may have today. So obviously, this is a critical time in our country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as more and more companies and their HR departments across the country are now beginning to look more closely at how they can reopen and slowly return to work in more of a normal work process within their offices and workplaces, and at least more normal than what we've experienced over the last month. And in light of that, as the expectation to be physically back in the workplace and to not be at home is now going to be increased, or is now at least increasing, more and more employees are likely to be requesting leaves under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or FFCRA, which is one of the new relief package laws that came out recently, which was also amended by the new CARES Act, another large relief law that came out recently, as well as leave questions that are going to be coming up under the old Family and Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, that many of us in the benefits and HR world are quite familiar with. And just as a quick thing to note here, as we talk about some common scenarios and questions, given that there's two types of leave under the FFCRA, there's both what's called emergency paid sick leave and emergency family and medical leave. We're going to refer to those simply today as paid sick leave and paid FMLA. Just makes it easier to refer to. And when referring to non-FFCRA leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act, we'll just call that unpaid FMLA, so you kind of understand what we're talking about as we go through this. So employees are also going to be having a lot of questions during this time, many questions about the impact of such leaves on their medical insurance, and specifically which of their health benefits will be continuing during their leave. And so we're going to talk about both the leaves and the benefits today as we talk about these different situations and scenarios and what's available. So let's take a closer look at some of the reasons that employees may want to take leave and see what kinds of leave and benefits may be available to them. Let's start with a hypothetical employer, XYZ Corp, that has less than 500 employees, that is subject to both the FFCRA and FMLA, and has three different divisions within the corporation. So on March 15th, 2020, XYZ Corp initiated a furlough, which had employees in Division A working a reduced hourly schedule, employees working in Division B working 0 hours, and employees in Division C not subject to the furlough at all. The furlough's end date or recall date is the end date is May 15th, 2020, and on May 16th, 2020 is the recall date. That's the date that all furloughed employees are expected to return to work. And in this case, in this hypothetical scenario, they're going to be returning to work their normal hours prior to the furlough. So also in this hypothetical scenario, the health plan's plan document and SPD contain eligibility terms that require that they offer health insurance coverage to employees who are full-time employees, as defined by the Affordable Care Act, or ACA, and as defined over a 12-month measurement period. And therefore, this plan, their health plan document is considered to be what we call synced with the ACA. So prior to March 15th, the HR and Benefits Department at XYZ Corp reviewed their employee handbook and their benefits plan documents and made the decision to continue to offer health insurance coverage for all furloughed employees retained on payroll during the furlough period. They've discussed this with their fully insured medical insurance carrier, and the carrier told them that it will allow employees to stay on the plan during the furlough period, and even if they no longer qualify as a full-time employee under the plan documents eligibility rules. So those are the background facts, and just to keep things simple here, we're not going to be examining all of the different, the different combinations and implications that could, permutations of what could be happening here, including the different state and local leave laws, nor union-specific or industry-specific leave laws, nor workplace safety and medical testing and temperature testing issues. But obviously in real life, particularly in some of the hotspot areas like New York City and New Jersey, there's going to be much more complicated scenarios out there than the ones that we're going to be discussing today. And for those, we would definitely encourage you to contact your benefits consultant at Corporate Synergies, where we can address your specific scenario in much more detail. Okay, so let's get started with our hypothetical scenarios. Okay, so employee Abby Andrews works in Division A at XYZ Corp and is working on a reduced hourly schedule pursuant to the terms of her company's furlough. But she contacts her company's HR rep on May 1st, 2020, asking for leave from work under the FFCRA because she is severely ill with the COVID-19 symptoms. She's already been diagnosed with COVID-19. She's already been advised to self-quarantine by her doctor, and she's not able to work or telework the reduced hours that she is required to work under the terms of her company's furlough. So what kind of leave and benefits is she entitled to? So under the FFCRA, Abby is entitled to take paid sick leave under the paid sick leave provisions of that law, referred to as the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act provisions. And those provisions allow her to take leave because she's already been ordered to self-quarantine by a doctor, and she's severely ill with COVID-19. And while Abby had requested leave, if Abby had requested leave prior to the furlough, that is, if she had requested leave while she was still a full-time employee, then she would have been entitled to take up to 80 hours of leave. But as a result of the furlough, she's now a part-time employee. And so under the FFCRA, for a part-time employee, the number of hours she can take of leave is equal to the average number of hours that the employee works over a typical 2-week period. And notably here, the hours of paid sick leave under this law are limited by her current reduced hour schedule. So in other words, she can only take leave with respect to the reduced hours that she's currently assigned to work. And to explain a little bit more here, the FFCRA and the relevant guidance make it very clear that the furlough that's causing her to work reduced hours is not the reason for why she needs to take leave, even if let's say the furlough was caused by COVID-19, and so she can't take leave or calculate her pay during such leave based on her regular hours of work that she would have been working as a full-time employee, but rather she has to take into account the current reduced hours schedule when she's looking at her leave time period. And so if the normal hours scheduled, also there's another rule here that says if the normal hours scheduled are unknown, or if the part-time employee's schedule varies, her employer may use a 6-month average to calculate the average daily hours. And then such a part-time employee also may take paid sick leave for this number of hours per day for up to that 2-week period. So how much is Abby entitled to get paid during this leave? Under the FFCRA's paid sick leave provisions, Abby would be entitled to be paid at her regular rate of pay, which is defined as the greater of her regular rate of pay, the federal minimum wage in effect under the Fair Labor Standards Act, or the applicable state or local minimum wage. The maximum amount of pay that she would be entitled to is $511 per day, or $5,110 in total over the entire paid sick leave period. So what about the expanded or paid FMLA provisions of the FFCRA and FMLA? While she would not be entitled to paid family and medical leave or paid FMLA under the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Act provisions of the FFCRA, since that's only available for caring for others due to school or daycare closures and not for the employee's own COVID-19 illness, she would be eligible for unpaid family and medical leave or unpaid FMLA, as this scenario would meet the definition of a serious health condition of the employee under the FMLA, assuming, of course, that the employee has worked for the employer for the sufficient period of time required under the FMLA and meets the other FMLA eligibility criteria. So under those circumstances, she would be entitled to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid FMLA during that 12-month period under the FMLA. And also, it's important to note here that an employee is entitled to paid sick leave. An employee is entitled to paid sick leave under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, part of the FFCRA, regardless of how much leave she has already taken under the FMLA. So, that is when we're talking about unpaid FMLA. That's an important thing to understand. That these are actually two different separate statutes when it comes to the paid sick leave provisions of the FFCRA. So paid sick leave under the FFCRA is not a form of FMLA leave, and therefore does not count toward the 12 work weeks in the 12-month period cap of the FMLA. So that's an important thing to take into consideration as well. And finally, it's important to note here that the employer offering Abby paid sick leave under the FFCRA as well as employers that would be offering paid FMLA under this law will be entitled to reimbursement through refundable tax credits made available by the IRS. And additional information about how those tax credits work and can be found on the IRS website. And the IRS has very helpful FAQ guidance on this topic, which we've provided links for. Now, with regard to the health insurance benefits, XYZ Corp will need to continue to offer health insurance to Abby during this leave period, as this is required under the FMLA and the FFCRA. But in any event, they've already agreed to offer it to all furloughed employees anyway, as per their agreement with their carrier. So she will continue to be offered coverage, through that time period. Now, one strategic thing to consider here on a going forward basis, and that will allow your organization to be more flexible in the event of an economic downturn or health emergency, is to amend your company's health and welfare plan to unsync your plan documents' eligibility provisions from those of the ACA. And just to get a little more specific, there's really nothing in the ACA, ERISA, or any other benefits laws that requires that an employer define full-time employee in its plan document in the same way that full-time employee is defined under the ACA. And nor do these laws require your organization to use a look-back measurement method to determine eligibility. You could use the monthly measurement method instead of a look-back measurement method, for example. Similarly, there's nothing that requires you to use a 12-month look-back measurement period as opposed to another time period for a look-back measurement period. So there is a lot of flexibility there. And when this pandemic started, a lot of employers that had synced eligibility in their plan document with the ACA and that had used a 12-month measurement period, really, as a result, had to offer furloughed employees on reduced hours health insurance coverage for the entire duration of the stability period that ran concurrently with that furlough period, because those furloughed employees had worked more than 30 hours on average over the associated 12-month measurement period that occurred prior to the furlough. But I think it's an important thing to understand that your organization doesn't necessarily have to do that, right? You have flexibility, and you're not required to set up your plan document that way when you're drafting your plan document's eligibility terms. So your organization could choose, for example, to measure certain categories of employees over a monthly measurement method as opposed to a look-back measurement method, and make other variations to allow your plan to be more flexible. And so what this would do is, of course, it would give your organization the flexibility to allow it to COBRA out employees on furlough if they're not working enough hours to be defined as a full-time employee under the terms of your plan. And it's definitely something worth discussing with your trusted benefits consultants or ERISA attorney. And we've seen we've seen more and more organizations doing that. So let's take another look at another example. Let's take a look at employee Billy Bird, who works in Division B at XYZ Corp. And is not working any hours at all on May 1st due to the furlough at XYZ Corp. But he is expecting to return to work and work his normal hours, which will be full-time hours, on May 16th at the end, after the recall date, after the furlough is over. And he calls into HR and he says, he wants to now take care of his young grandchild who lives with him in his home and who cannot be left at home without a parent, and who, due to a state-issued stay-at-home quarantine order, the grandchild cannot go to school because his school is closed. So unfortunately, Billy Bird isn't currently working any hours at all, and there's no hours available for him to work under the terms of his company's furlough, and therefore he's not entitled to any paid sick leave or any paid FMLA under the FFCRA. And also, unfortunately, caring for a grandchild is not a permitted reason to take leave under the FMLA. So he can't even take unpaid FMLA. And so even if he were working some hours on furlough, for example, if he worked in a different division while, caring for a son or daughter whose school is closed, that could be a reason for taking paid leave under the FFCRA, but of course that would depend on the specific nature of the relationship that he has with his grandchild. So, in some cases, a care for a grandchild can be considered to be the same as caring for a son or daughter. But obviously we would need more information in order to determine if that relationship qualifies for such leave provisions. And then finally, with respect to Billy Bird, we should mention that Billy Bird can still request paid sick leave or paid FMLA under the FFCRA on May 16th or later, when he's actually working those regular hours again after the recall date of the furlough. Of course, this would depend on whether or not those underlying eligibility reasons still apply, but certainly likely to be the case at that point. One other thing to note here, however, is that since this would be paid leave to care for someone else, not the employee himself, but rather to care for the employee's grandchild due to a COVID-19 related closure, and not due to the employee, needing to care for himself, Billy would only be entitled to take 2/3 of his regular rate of pay during those paid leave periods. So let's take one last example. Christy Crable. Christy Crable works in Division C and is not subject to the terms of her company's furlough, and therefore she is working regular hours at this time. And she's concerned about taking public transportation during the pandemic, and feels like she may have a little bit of a sore throat, but she doesn't have a fever. She hasn't been diagnosed with COVID-19. She hasn't been quarantined in any capacity, and hasn't yet visited a doctor about the sore throat that she's currently experiencing. So in this situation, unfortunately for Christy, we would need some more information about her circumstances to see if possibly she could take leave, perhaps because a doctor has advised her to self-quarantine, or if she's immunocompromised. She may have a severe health condition. So there's other factors that may still come into play, and we would need some more of that information to see if she has sufficient information to take a leave under one of these laws. But as of now, just based on what we know about her as of now, there really isn't enough information here for our HR and benefits department at XYZ Corp to give her leave at this point in time. So as a final consideration here, I definitely would encourage all of you to take a look at the FAQ guidance issued by the U.S. Department of Labor on these leave and benefits questions. The DOL has issued 88 of these Q&As now, each with very specific and plain English guidance on how to handle leaves and benefits issues under these new COVID-19 leave laws. And the link to this guidance, the DOL guidance, and the IRS FAQs that I mentioned earlier were posted to this invite for this YouTube briefing, and I've also posted them to my Twitter account at @dcooperstein, so that you can check them out there as well. And so thanks for joining us for these scenarios, and let's take some questions from our audience, and we'll see how we can help with any of your questions out there. And I'm looking out there now and seeing if there's any questions, and I actually don't see any questions. But definitely you can feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to to take any of your questions that you may have in the future. Thanks for joining us today.